Always, always, always communicate with your landlord.
The first thing you should do when you sign a lease is read it very thoroughly. It can give you a lot of information about what you are and are not allowed to do, both inside the house and outside the house.
When a client enters into a lease agreement with a landlord, it's important to understand that contract is helpful to both parties.
The lease really outlines the expectations of the relationship that you have with the landlord. And a lot of people don't realize that there's parts of the lease that you're accountable for as a tenant, but there's parts of the lease that the landlord is accountable.
Electricity, they've got water, gas, basic utilities. But I would also say probably most important as well would be safety, making sure that the people feel safe and that it's just a welcoming, safe environment for them to have their family in.
They're basically signing that agreement saying, I'm going to give you a roof over your head. I'm going to give you a unit that's solid. You'll have heat, you'll have water, you'll have utilities. Maybe they'll pay for them, or maybe you're responsible for paying them. But these are all the things that I'm going to provide for you. On the tenant end, when you're signing that agreement, you're obviously saying you're going to pay your rent every month on time. You're going to follow the terms of the agreement. You're not going to have all kinds of people in and out of your unit. You're not going to cause issues or damage the unit in any kind of a way.
You really should have an open line of communication. You should have a relationship with your landlord, because you can follow all the rules, but if something happens and you have a problem, you need to talk, you need to be honest, and you need to explain, and maybe there's a way to work it.
So typically things that would be the responsibility of the landlord would be anything having to do with the structure itself. So like I said, if pipes are leaking, if you have a leak somewhere in your unit, if your heat isn't working, your furnace, anything like that is going to be the responsibility of the landlord. Now, things that are going to be the responsibility of the tenant would be if there's damage done to the unit beyond normal wear and tear. And normally a lease agreement will actually say that, if it's beyond normal wear and tear, they're probably going to charge you or ask you to make those repairs. For instance, if there is a hole in a wall, something like that. If a door isn't closing right, hinges are broken because it's been slammed or something like that. Those are going to be things that they're probably going to put on the tenant. But anything else that's normal wear and tear would be the landlord's responsibility.
So the appropriate standard of cleanliness, I think there's two things. There's inside your apartment or your rental home, and there's outside. So inside the home, you need to keep it clean and picked up, and especially in the kitchen and the bathrooms. You don't want to have food lying about. You don't want to have your trash overflowing and dirty dishes in the sink. And honestly, those kinds of things can attract bugs and rodents that can cause even bigger problems. If there's nail holes in your walls, you can patch them up. It doesn't take much to patch them up or to fix some paint chips or whatever. And it just goes to the whole look of the place. And so when you move to the outside, there shouldn't be any trash lying around. Again, that can attract bugs and rodents. If it's your responsibility, keep your lawn mowed and picked up.
A tenant should report a maintenance issue as soon as they know there is an issue. Most places will have a 24-hour line that you can call a maintenance team. So if there is a problem in the middle of the night, say it's a cold night, maybe it's below freezing and your heat goes out and it's 11 p.m. You can make that call immediately to that line and say, hey, I'm having issues with my heat. I need, get someone out here. I would never wait on anything like that, because sometimes in waiting, the problem may actually get worse. It really takes the liability off of the tenant, because you can then say, I let them know as soon as there was a problem. If they wait a day or two, to get out and fix it, you've now taken that responsibility off of yourself. You made it known to the landlord.
So when it comes to appliances, some landlords will supply all of the appliances and ask you to just keep proper care of them. And if something tends to break down that's normal wear and tear, the landlord would typically be responsible to either fix or replace that appliance. Now, if it was something that was not caused by normal wear and tear and it was by damage from a tenant, then the tenant would typically have to pay for that repair or replace that appliance. If there isn't appliances already in the unit and it states on your lease that you have to provide them, you need to make sure you know what type of appliances that you can bring. An example is a dryer. It can be a gas dryer or an electric dryer. So you need to know what the unit is set up to be able to use. Same with like air conditioners. You need to make sure that the windows would accommodate an air conditioner, because some windows are bigger or smaller or funky size. You never know.
Some landlords will allow you to redecorate or hang things on the walls or paint, and others won't. But you won't know for sure unless you read the lease. Now, you can always ask your landlord, or maybe if it's not in the lease, ask and have a plan. You know, say, here's what I have in mind. Is that something that you would be okay with me doing? All leases are going to handle pest control a little bit differently. And again, you should definitely do everything you can to minimize the risk of pests. However, if you do have an issue, and not just a few ants during the springtime, or some flies in the house, but if you have what you think is a real serious problem, you need to read your lease and see what it says, who's responsible, and really if you can get into trouble for not taking care of it. You may be nervous or worried about calling your landlord regarding a pest issue, but it can only get worse over time. So, and everybody at one time or another deals with pest control issues.
So I think it's important, if someone has the means to do it, I think it's important to obtain renter's insurance. Some landlords will put in the lease agreement that you have to have it. It really isn't very expensive. It sounds like it's a lot, but I mean, sometimes it might be $20 a month, maybe less, to actually carry renter's insurance. And if there's ever anything that happens in your unit, it will cover everything that you have in there. And I think it's more of a peace of mind for the tenant that you really don't have to worry if anything happens, that you still have the ability to get and replace all of your belongings, whether it's clothing, furniture, kitchen items. $20 a month or maybe a little more is not a lot to pay to make sure that you have all those items replaced if something ever happens to your unit.
Usually prior to moving in, you have what's called a security deposit, and that holds your apartment for when you move in. It holds your space. With the security deposit, it also is something that the landlord has to say, I know you're not going to damage the property, because if you do, I have these funds, because the security deposit has to be placed into a savings account, and it actually occurs interest on it. So when you finish that lease and say you move out, you could potentially, if you return the keys and you satisfy your lease the way it is, get all of those funds back. It will outline in your lease the amount that's due every month. It'll tell you what day it is. It's usually the 1st of the month or the 3rd of the month. And it'll tell you what your grace period is if you have a grace period. Grace periods typically tend to be about 3 to 5 days. So if, say, your rent is due on the 1st, you may have until the 3rd before you're considered late. The next thing you have to consider is, if you are late, are there penalties? And are there late fees? As well as, are you able to pay partial rent, or do you have to pay it in full?
Whether it's going to be, trash pickup, or they're responsible for electric, water, sewer, and gas, or just electric or just gas. People just, from time to time who, the landlord, keeps giving them the bill for them to pay, and they don't realize that they've had to get this in their name all this time. So, I kind of, guide them into how to go about getting it in their name. But it's not always spelled out for them how to do that. It can be kind of tricky if someone is not really familiar with the area. So, having it spelled out really detailed in the lease for where they need to go, or having that landlord relationship where you have to go here to get that done. As far as utility usage, when I'm working with somebody and they're saying, oh my gosh, these utilities are so high here, I just don't understand why they're so high. And then I'm asking some more questions. I want to know, what is your air conditioning set on? Or what have you been keeping your heat on? And I'm hearing some really surprising things. We get cold, so it's set on 80. And, for energy efficiency, in the wintertime, it should be set on 68. I think energy efficiency for summertime, it should be 72, 70, 72, around 72. It could even go higher than that. I just think it's really important for people when they move into wherever it is they're moving into to kind of, maybe get a baseline. How much are utilities usually around here? I've had people do that before, call the utility company and say, I'm moving into this new unit. What generally do you see as far as the utilities at this unit? I've done that for people before, where I'm just like, well, I'm going to see with the last tenant how they ran to see, what kind of usage they had. Calls and they have an unusually high water bill. I want to see it. I want to look at the water usage. I'm calling the utility company and I'm having them send me previous month's usage because I want to see what their baseline is. And then I usually talk to the utility company, have them go out and do a new read, because, the way Oberlin utilities run, we're a couple of months behind to where, you get your bill and you have this huge water bill. You're already another month into usage, to where if this hasn't been addressed, you're going to end up with at least a couple months worth of really high utility bill. So I do have people, I will contact the utility company. It's like, hey, let's go out and do an extra read, and then we can find out if, what's going on there.
Another thing that people need to consider with their lease is occupancy. So when you sign the lease and you're signing this binding contract, it's between you, possibly your spouse or another adult, and the leaser, your landlord. However, there may be people also listed on the lease, such as your children, adult children, another family member. If they're included on the lease, then they're able to reside there full time as if you did as well. Now, two things to consider is visitors and subletting. Visitors, usually it's outlined somewhere in the lease, and if it's not, I would get clarity from your landlord how long of a stay a visitor is allowed. Sometimes it's 2 days, sometimes it's a week, and there can be clear guidelines saying this is how long it is, and if it extends past this time, what you would have to do, whether it is amend the lease, pay an additional fee, or even just inform the landlord so they know what's going on. It's all about that communication. The second one is subletting. Some people might have a hard time paying for their rent, and they want somebody else to move in with them, to help make that burden lightened a little bit. But you really have to check your lease first, because you can't charge somebody else to live with you unless the landlord allows it.
There needs to be a little amendment to the lease. Maybe, I need to add someone to the lease. I know we talked about it just being me and my 2 children, but my sister is in a really difficult position and she needs she needs a place to stay. Can I add this person to the lease, or can we talk about this? They are more willing to work with the tenant if everything's up, if the rent's paid on time.
Some landlords allow that option, many do not though, so that's something really to check for. And one other thing I would like to mention is pets. You really, really want to make sure that you look in your lease to see if you own pets, if you're allowed to have pets on your property. Is there a pet deposit that you would need in case there's damages from your pet? And is there a monthly fee? A lot of times landlords will charge an additional $20 or so on top of the rent as a pet fee.
But even if you're charged extra, you still have to take care of them and pick up after them. If they are, I mean, dogs bark, that's what they do. But if they're barking for an extended period of time, bring them inside, until they calm down. Or if it's late at night, definitely bring them inside so that they're not disturbing your neighbors.
You are responsible for your guest. So if they're causing trouble, if there's drugs, if they're parking in a wrong area, you are responsible for them. That if you do plan on having somebody stay, for a week or, longer than a few days. Typically I see, a couple days that they will allow, but anything over that, the landlord, does not or wants to be notified. It's depending on where the land, it's located. You either, can park on the street, or it'll say how many vehicles are allowed in the driveway or parking lot. A lot of times they do not want broken down vehicles, or even I've seen where they do not want you to be repairing your vehicle in the parking lot, road, driveway, because the neighbors have to as well live in the neighborhood as you do. And excessive noise that can, neighbor may work third shift or the different shifts that they may be working. It's just, being nice about not being so loud. Because a lot of times maybe that neighbor may complain to the landlord that, that there's excessive noise. They can possibly call the law enforcement. You definitely don't want that, your landlord being contacted. It's like loud music, maybe after 11 p.m., excessive yelling, having guests over that are loud after 11 p.m. is usually the time that I've noticed.
To be a good neighbor is important. If you're a good neighbor, then you're also a good tenant.
If you reach out to communicate with someone about something, that's on your terms. If you let something go and leave it to chance, you are relinquishing your terms. Yes, it is intimidating. Yes, it is, you should feel nervous or intimidated with going into that conversation, but you're helping your future self and you're helping to establish trust with your landlord. Every conversation that you have with them is not going to be all, rainbows and butterflies and everything. You're going to have difficult conversations. And in that relationship, it really, really helps to, at the onset of bad news, say it as soon as possible. Just try to get over that hump, be brave, reach out. And younger people are being conditioned to think that they can't fix it. And I really think that people need to hear it more. We can get through this. We might not know exactly how we're going to get through this. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. We might need to call other people to help us get through this, but we can get through this, and we can get through this together. And I think that the landlord-tenant relationship is one of those.